Hello, and welcome to South Asian Success. This podcast is focused on empowering, engaging, and connecting our community. I'm going to be talking to South Asian leaders who are putting culture at the forefront as they build companies, drive communities, lean into creativity, and build better. We hope you'll enjoy the journeys that we share on this podcast, journeys of individuals who are building success on their own terms with culture at the forefront. Hi there. Welcome to our first episode of South Asian Success. I am very, very thrilled today to be able to talk to someone that I actually admired from afar for a while. And we're going to talk about kind of the intersection of life, of work, and of art today. So three really, really wonderful pieces of the puzzle. Welcome, Pothik. I'm so happy to have you here. For those that may not know, Pothik is an amazing fine arts practitioner as well as a tech practitioner. So we're going to dive in a little bit of his journey. But I actually have a piece of his beautiful art in my home. So I have to just shout out to the amazing work that he does and actually being able to see it in person. Welcome, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing well, Pyral. It's wonderful to be on your podcast, and I'm honored to be your first South Asian success story for your podcast series. And thank you for being a patron of my art.
I know. I loved following your art. It took me some time to become a patron, right? But I think like many things, you really need to, art is a serious decision, right? As I say. And I just was admiring via Instagram for a long time and had the great privilege of having a custom piece in my home now. So thank you again for that. Just let's get started and talk about you. If you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience and let's tell us about your journey. What are you doing, now? Where have you been? Give us a little bit of the story.
Sure. So I am the CEO of my own fine arts business, Pothik Chatterjee Fine Arts, which I launched in 2021. So it's now been 4 years of running and growing my creative business that's now in 5 different cities in the United States through galleries and representation. I've sold over 150 paintings since I first started to buyers all over the country and actually all over the world. So it's been a tremendous journey. I do wear multiple hats. So I have a day job. My day job is executive director for Houston Methodist and Rice University's Digital Health Institute. So we do research, development, so R&D and education on AI in healthcare, developing, validating, and testing algorithms for improved detection and diagnostics for heart attacks, for example, or various types of cancers. We also have Rice faculty that are developing new wearables that can help us with continuous tracking for diabetic patients, for example, or help us with remote patient monitoring. So I think it's one of the coolest jobs in the world. I've been in the digital health space for 11 years now, since getting my MBA from Harvard Business School. I was at Brigham and Women's Hospital, setting up their innovation hub all the way back in 2014. And fast forward to today, leading this institute in the world's largest medical center right here in Texas. So the Texas Medical Center sees over 10 million patients each year, and it's also incredibly diverse. So we have incredible data, incredible expertise, and investment in AI and digital health tools.
Wow. Okay. So to be truthful, because I've followed you for your art, I didn't actually realize how much intertwined with it in the world of technology, AI, and actually I lived in Boston, fun fact. So, wonderful to have those things in common. Thank you for sharing all these kind of stories. I feel like what a rich, rich career path, right? And then here you are, also an artist. As someone who kind of is a multi-hyphenate, wears many hats, I can definitely respect and understand having a creative outlet. But it took me a really long time. So tell us, when did you sort of realize this passion of yours?
Yeah, so I was very passionately into art all through my childhood. I think starting at 4 years old, 5 years old. And I also grew up internationally, which is something that I wanted to mention. So I was born in India to an Indian family. My parents are both Bengali from Calcutta. which goes by Kolkata now, which is our traditional Bengali way of calling our city. But I was growing up in Dubai when I was a child for the first 7 years of my life. And I remember I was always really into drawing and art from a very young age. And my mother was a big supporter and champion for me. And I think she submitted one of my drawings to a local magazine for kids, and it was picked up and published. And that gave me this, even at that young age, this like stamp of validation that, oh, wow, art is something to be celebrated and encouraged. So I continued that all through elementary school. When I was in like fourth grade, I moved to Paris. My dad's a computer programmer working with an oil and gas company that used to be headquartered in France called Schlumberger, and now they're headquartered in Houston, Texas, ironically enough. But yeah, moving to Paris actually was in second grade. So I was only like 8 years old when I moved to Paris, obviously being one of the meccas of art in the world. We lived in the city in an apartment, and I went to the International School of Paris, which was like across the street from the Eiffel Tower. And again, my mother really she's not an artist herself, but she's an art lover. And she's got a really beautiful sense of aesthetics with home decor, collecting sculptures. Like she has a collection of Ganesha sculptures from all the different places that we lived in, like Indonesia, where we moved to later. But from at that young age, my mom actually took me to the Louvre, to the Musée d'Orsay, which is an incredible museum of Impressionist art. I learned French fluently because I was there at like second grade. And we also went to the Claude Monet water lily paintings at the museum called L'Orangerie. And so from a very young age, I learned from the French that art is something to be celebrated. And if you make it to that level, you can be very wealthy, you can be celebrated, successful, and your art can actually, even beyond like material success, it can change the way people view nature, the way people view other human beings and relationships. So I just really was lucky to have that type of exposure from second grade till sixth grade. And then we moved back to the UAE, to Abu Dhabi, which is where I did my middle school. And then in 10th grade, we moved to Jakarta, Indonesia, which again was like, just like Paris was like this moment of flowering in my imagination of the power and the beauty of art. In Indonesia, it was more about like giving me the chance to connect with my Indian culture, because I was quite like confused because I was from an Indian family, but growing up all around the world. We would go to Calcutta every single summer for 3 months at a time. So I speak Bengali fluently. I'm super close to all my grandparents when they were alive, my uncles and aunts and cousins. So culturally, I feel very Indian, but I was always getting like a international American education at these different schools. So there's quite like a culture gap or clash or conflict. But going to Indonesia, actually being in like a part of Asia that has a very strong Indian, Hindu, Buddhist impact on culture, history, architecture was super empowering for me and gave me a lot of pride in my Asian identity and my Indian identity, because I was able to go to Bali and see these incredible Hindu temples that Indonesians and Indians had built together. And so, yeah, like every kind of part of my childhood gave me some type of artistic inspiration. And then sadly, well, I took one when I went to college. I came to the United States when I was 17 to attend undergrad at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And I did take one studio art class at Georgetown, which was wonderful. I actually found parts of undergrad challenging, like being an international student coming to the US for the first time. Like the rigor of academic expectations was very strong and very high at Georgetown. So it took me like my freshman year to find my feet. And I took this art class when I was about to graduate. And it was just so validating because everything I did, the professor would say, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And maybe it's true that I was talented since I'm now a professional artist, but it was also just what I needed to hear at that point. And then the crazy part of my story is after graduation, I graduated at 20, I stopped doing art for 20 years. And when I say stopped, I mean like not even drawing, doodling, sketching, painting, nothing. I just completely stopped doing art because of my kind of immigrant brainwash or programming and cultural programming that art is not something you can do like most of us are not Van Gogh or Monet. It's not something you can do that's practical. So I focused on building my career in finance and then pivoting into healthcare. And I have had a lot of success and a lot of milestones, but it felt like I had cut off a limb or something. Because you know how people, when they go through a surgery, they still have this like phantom limb feeling? That's how I felt with art. Like I just completely cut it off because I thought it was frivolous, it was childish, it was feminine. Like growing up, a lot of the people I saw around me really engaging in painting and art were girls, and I would connect more with them as a gay teenager or child. So I really cut it off for many reasons. And then what changed was the pandemic. So it was not until 2020 when I was in Baltimore working in healthcare, leading innovation and research for a healthcare system, and finding that I'm working from home a lot because of active COVID. And we were in a very small pandemic bubble in Baltimore. And that's when I thought, what can I do in the midst of all this death and destruction happening? The vaccine hadn't even come out yet. Doctors don't know how to save these patients. It was very depressing, very dark, filled with a lot of death and a lot of loss. And so I thought, why don't I reconnect with my art? Because at least that's creating something beautiful and hopeful for me. And if it even inspires one other person, like that's still creating something light and joyful. And honestly, that's how I started at my kitchen table in my apartment in Baltimore, taking Zoom classes with a teacher on Facebook. So I found my teacher. Her name was Her name is Barbara DiLorenzo. She's actually a children's book illustrator, and she works with Princeton University Arts Council and does these free classes every Thursday. And I remember the first one I went to, I was like, there were adults in the class, but there were also like 8-year olds and 9-year old children. And it was so humbling because I was learning again about literally like perspective, value, the technical fundamentals of art after 20 years as an adult. So it was a little humbling, but it was also incredibly fun. And I just kept at it. And I took an oil painting class with Barbara. And then, like a year later, started selling to family and friends via Instagram, and then created my own website. And the rest is history.
That is so incredible. Okay, so I have to unpack many things here because, well, one is like talk about this upbringing of. I'm so sorry. I'm having like a weird audio thing. Do you hear that audio thing? Are you hearing that? Okay, maybe it's just me. I'm gonna cut that out. Okay, sorry. So I have to unpack a couple of things. One is you talk about an upbringing related to cultivating like a love for art, right? Whether or not you, yes, you had some accolades as a young kid, but whether or not you enjoyed it, your mom put you in those places, or your parents put you in those places to absorb it. And I think that is just so interesting because a lot of foundational elements of how we create are probably built based on what our parents expose us to, right? And I think back and I'm like, my dad took me to a musical way back when, and I remember that as like one of the defining moments of when I fell in love with musicals. So it sounds very similar for you, but I also love that you kind of went on the typical path nonetheless, given all these, amazing kind of global experiences, you went on the typical path, and maybe it was always there in the back of your mind as a thing, right? But you kind of did what many of us do, which is focus on career, focus on your own, kind of path that you think is the defined one. And you went on to do something in a time when a lot of people rediscovered their passions. And COVID was unfortunately that dire time, but people gained they had time back. They had a reason. You also did recently an article for Bold Journey magazine, and I remember reading that you also felt that there was an element of imposter syndrome that you were able to overcome through art. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I think for South Asians, like many of us go on the standard paths, like be a doctor, be an engineer, be a this, right? Something that is, that produces value in the sense of what our culture thinks value is. But, you've changed, you've pivoted, and you're still doing a very traditional path, but you're also cultivating this cultural one. So I'd love to hear kind of how has this also helped you grow more into your own?
Yeah, on the imposter syndrome thing, it's something that I've struggled with both in the art world and launching my art business and selling my paintings, but also in my traditional professional world as well. As an MBA, I also have a master's from economics, and I'm in a corporate executive type of path and world. And oftentimes I am the only non-white, like the only person of color at the table. And oftentimes I'm the only openly gay LGBTQ person at the table in senior level meetings in healthcare or technology types of environments. And so that naturally gave me a sense of imposter syndrome because I felt different. I really questioned my value and my voice compared to others who might be more experienced or kind of grew up because of the color of their skin or the wealth of their family's generational wealth going to private schools and things like that. And so it's really something I struggled with for a long time. I would say what helped me in my professional, well, actually, I would say the confidence that I gained with my success in art actually helped me become more entrepreneurial, more assertive, more creative, and just more like able to jump into conversations with ambiguity. Because when you're an artist launching a business, there's no clear roadmap, right, of what type of style you should pursue, how to create a budget for your collectors. Is it based on the size or based on how many solo shows you've had or how many galleries you're in? There's a lot that you have to figure out for yourself and what resonates with your target audience. And that entrepreneurial confidence and belief in myself, I was really able to take that into my professional world, because there's a lot of similarities actually. Like at our institute in digital health, a big part of my job is the translational part. So it's great that all these breakthroughs are happening in labs around AI, wearables, and imaging in the world of digital health. But how do we translate that into real world tools that can help doctors, that can help nurses, or even patients monitor their own health and make sense of the data? And we don't do that in isolation, even with powerhouses like Houston Methodist and Rice University. We still have to partner with industry companies like Microsoft or Philips or Samsung, for example, to co-invent and co-create these new solutions. And then they have all the resources to be able to take it to the market themselves and commercialize it. So to go back to your question, I found my experiences in art, in the art world, to be really empowering. And even that wasn't just like, just clicking my fingers and all of a sudden I gave up my imposter syndrome as an artist. I would say in the art world, it was challenging in a different way because I don't have an MFA. I don't have a traditional academic path in art. I'm basically self taught, self trained. Although I would argue I have like my full childhood into high school, many years of training experience, but I never got like the adult version of that. And again, that's partly because of immigration, politics in South Asian families. It's considered wasteful sometimes to spend $1,000 or more on something like art. It's like, oh, just figure it out yourself. Why do you need to go through a program to learn about it? So the way that I got over my imposter syndrome with art was just like my personality, I think, being very, sometimes my friends call me Delulu to the point where I believe it, but I'm able to kind of convince others through my passion and my enthusiasm about the value of investing in fine art and how they're not just investing in a canvas or a painting, but they're actually investing in legacy and continuing the cultural gifts of our previous generation, but in an aesthetic that is meaningful to us as modern Americans or modern citizens of the world. So there's an element of Delulu that did help me in my journey to overcome my imposter syndrome. But then also like hard work and success. People don't realize how being an artist is so much hard work. And actually, just even in the act of creating the paintings, it takes me weeks to create a painting because I work in layers. It's physically strenuous. I'm working with different materials like acrylic, like wax that I'm pouring onto the canvas. So even physically, it's a lot more hard work than just, playing some classical music and relaxing and treating it like art therapy. I actually started to develop back pain because I was painting on the ground when I first started. And then I finally got an easel and I realized, oh, this is a much nicer way to paint. But that's just the creation part. Outside of that, you're a full business person. You're a marketing person, you're the gallery contact, you're the speaker in public spaces, you are developing marketing lists. So it's like a whole startup with one person. And so I think having an MBA, having both my left and right sides of my brain being activated or strong, or maybe that's something that I'm blessed with, did really help me. Because sometimes I find artists could be really good at all the creative stuff, but they might not have the experience or natural discipline to cultivate, the audiences, the marketing, even like how to talk about your art, how to explain what your art means, especially with abstract art. That's a skill too. And even like presenting your art in the digital world is actually a skill in itself. I started selling a lot of my paintings after I downloaded a digital app called Smartest that actually stages your paintings for you. So instead of the person on Instagram just looking at your art by itself, they get a much better idea. Oh, how would this look in my living room? How would this look in my kitchen? How would this look in my guest room with my furniture, with the color of my walls? So it's really cool to see how all of these steps that I took, all the work that I did as an artist to overcome my imposter syndrome, did lead to successful sales. It led to a sold out solo show, my first solo show in Baltimore in 2023. I also got into a gallery in New York, which is considered, like the pinnacle of the modern art world and in the globe. And they were able to place one of my paintings called Mango Summer on a billboard in front of the Empire State Building. And I
Yeah.
remember that being a real moment where I realized I'm not an imposter. Like, I belong here. My art is connecting with people, and the world needs more of my art.
I love that. I know that's a great, and so I that's such an interesting story because as you were talking, I was thinking about how you were actually a good salesperson in our process too, because I was indecisive. I remember I was making decisions, but I wasn't fully ready to make my decision. But you were like, I don't know what the right word is, not persistent, but like you nurtured that lead, right? You had a lead, you nurtured the lead. And it's a very much a sales mindset. I can respect that because after becoming an entrepreneur myself, 2024, and then also trying to work in the creative space, cultivating your audience, really understanding what your audience wants, and then also trying to sell to your audience. Those are skills. Many people in the corporate world, you don't have to do that. There's a company marketing team that's doing it, right? Like
Right.
you got to do your day job. But I also love how you talked about how it feeds back into the business work that you do because it probably builds confidence. It builds ability to have repertoire with people that you may have to sort of sell to in a way. So it's funny because I had recently talked to someone else who also was talking about how her creative outlet was feeding into her work life now. So the more that we can not only help the world and make the world better with the art or the work that we do, it's like you're actually making yourself better too, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I love to hear that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your influence, right? I know you shared with us the cultural journey that you took. And it's great that you mentioned even like l'orangerie because I literally, when I see your artwork, I'm very much an abstract artist lover, art lover. And I always have loved like, Monet, the Impressionists in general. And when I saw your work, that's why I think I clicked with it. That's why I resonated with it. But I would love to hear like some of the influences. You mentioned obviously South Asian culture and heritage. And I know you bring that in. You label a lot of your paintings with South Asian names, but you also sometimes are painting South Asian figures. I'd love to hear more about that and kind of how do you find that influence? How do you how does it come to you? And then what other things are you seeing and doing that help you to continue to cultivate?
Yeah, I would say my influences are a real fusion of East and West. My early influences were directly from the Mandir, attending Durga Puja each year as a diasporic Bengali, as part of the diasporic Bengali community. My parents were really involved, like even more so than they would be if you were still living in India, because as an expat, like everyone's expected to help out with cooking the food, serving the food, actually like dancing or singing in the cultural programs. So my involvement was drawing the Durgas, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Ganesh, Kartik, and we celebrate the whole family for Durga Puja each harvest, each fall. And so that's where I really got to hone my training and practice of all the jewelry and the gold ornamentation, which really fascinated me as a child. And then my time in France made me really fall in love with Monet's gardens in Giverny and seeing the influence again of the East on Western art because Monet was really inspired by Japanese wood prints and Japanese illustrations of flowers and plants and the flattening and playing with composition in ways that were new to France. And then as an adult, I would say some of my favorite artists are Leonardo da Vinci as well from the Renaissance. I love that he was also a man of both art but also science. He was discovering new aircrafts and new ways of doing things. And I loved how that fed into his paintings that are so anatomically precise, but also filled with emotion and filled with very human kind of mother, son, Mother Mary, baby Jesus types of paintings. On the South Asian side, I didn't have the benefit of getting a lot of education about who my ancestral artistic inspirations could be. I had to kind of learn about them as an adult myself. So as an adult, I learned about the Bengal school, which was very resonated with me because I'm Bengali, but a member of the Tagore family, Abanindranath Tagore. And there are other artists too, like Jamini Roy, who rejected the British colonial type of art, which is, what you'd imagine of like 18th century oil paintings of Queen Victoria, and moving towards more Indian ways of representation, meaning using more earthy, bright colors, using even different materials like colors made from leaves and the earth to really transform. And a great example of this is Tagore's painting of Mother India or Bharat Mata. And he painted her as this really beautiful, calm mother wearing like the colors of like a monk, like saffron robes, and showing, because British people would only see India as like a map, right, of areas that you can cut up, divide, partition after 1947. But Tagore was presenting this much more nurturing, maternal view of India using our own iconographic history. And so that's a great example of South Asian artists really taking over our own methods and our own artistic language. I'm also really inspired as a LGBTQ person by Amrita Shergill, who is like the Frida Kahlo of India. She was half Indian, half Hungarian, part of the LGBTQ community. And I love the kind of authentic honesty of her portraits and the presence. Like you still feel like you can talk to these women and reach out and touch them because there's something that's so timeless about the way that she presented her subjects.
Well, thank you for sharing some actual names. I think that that's great for people that are not familiar with South Asian artists or of present future. It's great to be educated. You mentioned the Bengal school, and I think it's interesting because you also, like my dad actually grew up in Calcutta too. And so I'm actually heading there next week for a family event. But I think there's so much richness of Indian literature and art that comes from that region that we probably just barely scratch the surface on our understanding even of what, and forget just that region. I mean all of the subcontinent, right? And like it's so interesting to hear you kind of talk about those different inspirations, and I hope others go and dig in a little and learn about some.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on for hours and hours.
Yeah,
Like
thanks.
Satyajit Ray being an Oscar winner, lifetime winner, because of his amazingly humanistic movies that were completely different from Bollywood and your commercial masala pot boilers into something like the life of a villager and the struggles that they experience, but shown in a way that you and I can relate to without ever having stepped into an Indian village, for example. But Satyajit Ray, Rabindranath Tagore, Jhumpa Lahiri in our modern times. Arundhati Roy is half Bengali, she's half from Kerala. And even my sister, Godali Gupta, is an incredible Bengali poet, Bengali American poet, the author of Desert Marigold, and she's about to launch her second book this spring. So more details coming out there. But yeah, I do feel really fortunate that I was born into a region of India that does celebrate visual art, literature, music, dance in every household. Like it's a very, very common.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So let's shift gears a little bit, and I want to ask you kind of questions more, I think, I don't know what the right word is, existential. What is the feeling you want to evoke from your art? What do you hope people feel when they see one of your paintings?
Yeah, that's kind of evolving for me. When I initially started during the pandemic, I was very focused on people feeling the healing that comes from art, a sense of meditation, restorative energy that you might get from like a yoga class or even a yoga nidra class, a sense of peace. What I'm feeling more now in 2026 in our kind of volatile political national climate is the idea of art as resistance. And I'm really inspired by my forefathers and mothers that came before me from colonial times in South Asia, where they did use art to create these protest banners and really win the hearts and minds of South Asian people to rise up and revolt from British colonialism, mainly through, Gandhi's amazing peaceful protests. But I'm trying to connect with that energy now in 2026 as a brown, gay father. I'm trying to think about, how can we awaken people's consciousness and sense of humanity about what's happening in Minneapolis with ICE and these kind of attacks on our democracy, our ability to have free speech, free protest. And art has always been such a powerful, peaceful way to connect with people's consciousness, right? Like during Nazi Germany, there was this whole movement to get rid of degenerate art. And I've always been fascinated by, how does someone become a degenerate artist? Can I become that? Like, that almost sounds like a label that you would want to have to be interesting and compelling. But I fear that there are parallels now where funding is being reduced significantly for national arts organizations. A lot of brown and black artists that I know are feeling that fear about the future. A lot of LGBTQ artists and people that I know are feeling that fear as well. So I'm really focused on not necessarily putting the viewer at ease and feeling that sense of relaxation that I was originally pursuing. Now it's more about how can you see what the colors or the composition or the emotion of the painting, how can that awake your innate sense of humanity and want justice and speak up at your own way? I know not everyone can go to a protest in person, right? It's not the same for a brown person as it is for a white person to go out in public and hold up a banner. But there could be other ways. You could donate funding to legal clinics in Minneapolis, for example. You could donate to LGBTQ organizations that provide shelter for teenagers that are kicked out of their homes for coming out. So I hope that my art can act as a means of resistance and awakening. That's ultimately what I'm really for in 2026.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, art is such a powerful tool. And whether we think about it that way or not, every piece of media and propaganda is essentially someone's art, And now maybe ChatGPT's art, but whatever, to each their own. It is created, right? It's somebody is designing and cultivating and creating, and it can be such a powerful tool, not only to drive, I still think there's value in the message of peace, right? Because there is some of that I think people also need, right? And I actually find your art, like, I actually feel like it's energizing. So if that's also a direction that you're going to energize and engage, that's, I think you're already doing it a little bit. So just that's,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a big push. And I would also say, when I say awakening, it doesn't have to necessarily be just anger or like a sense of outrage. It could also be awakening a sense of joy, because this is going to be a marathon in our lifetime, right? This is going to be a long-term journey, at least for me and my artistic career. I consider myself mid-career. I'm 41 years old. My birthday is coming up on Saturday. I'm about to turn 42. So I'm not young, but I still have some runway in my life as an artist, as a professional. So I think it's really important to remember that joy, connection, celebration, these are all things that fuel us in our journey as well.
I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that change in your journey. And last bit of kind of questioning for me, but what advice would you give to the future you, right? Or somebody that's struggling with self-doubt or pressure? We all know, I've talked to young South Asians, young people today are still dealing with a lot of similar kind of societal norms and pressures. What kind of advice would you give them, to get started on their journey or to take the next step?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is mentorship. It's so important when you're younger, earlier in your artistic or professional journey, to find mentors that you really admire that you'd love to follow in their footsteps and seek out that type of mentor-mentee relationship, which actually is like a big part of our South Asian tradition. When you think about like music or dance or art, there's usually that guru shishya relationship. There's even like schools and genres that people become experts in. I found that to be really valuable now as a mentor when I speak with some of my younger mentees who are in their early 20s or mid 20s and still in school or trying to figure out what their path forward can look like. Just having that conversation and exposure of what opportunities look like. Because let's say you're really passionate about fine arts and painting, for example, right? Oil painting or acrylic painting. Your ideal pathway may not be being a professional artist in a studio, selling through galleries and directly to customers. It might be being like the editor of Vogue magazine or being in a fashion house, working with Schiaparelli and incredible fashion designers to design their next, I don't know, magazine or some kind of fashion related art. So there's so many different options for creative careers that I did not learn about when I was studying economics at Georgetown or getting my MBA. So I would say seek out mentorship, try to learn more about what these different career pathways look like, and don't be so strict because it can really change and evolve over the course of your journey. And now with AI and technology, who knows what career pathways and artistic profiles are even going to look like 10 years from now. I would say those are the two main things. The third would be like really cultivate your circle of friends, family that share your values. Because if and when you do become a professional artist one day, that's going to be your first like friends and family, just like a startup raising capital. They go to friends and family and angel investors first, and then you go to VCs and institutional investors. So it's kind of the same as a creative. Like all the connections that you're building, try to hold on and nurture the meaningful ones because they can really help highlight you as an artist. Because art doesn't live by itself. Like if you put up a painting and no one looks at it except you, it's not really coming to life. I really believe that it's through the viewer, through the darshan of viewers and the relationships and emotions aroused, that's when your art comes to life. So I hope that was helpful.
That's so helpful. I feel like that's wonderful advice. And I think it can go across many art forms. Like I think that advice is great for anyone that has a dream to aspire to. And I also love that you sought learning, right? You went and re-sought learning as an adult. So finding those mentorship opportunities, finding opportunities to learn, those are ways we can all, just get a little bit better at the craft that we want to do. So really love to hear that. Any last notes for the audience today before we sign off here?
No, thank you for this wonderful experience. I wanted to share that I have, I don't know when this is coming out, but I have a show in New York right now with Maison 10 Gallery in Chelsea. So if you're in New York or visiting New York soon, I believe it'll be up for another month or two. So check out Maison 10, Maison. And I also have a local art show coming up in Houston next week on February 12th. And it's really interesting. It's with a law firm called Womble, Bond and Dickinson that highlights local Houstonian artists. And I have three of my paintings that are on show until the end of March. If you have any listeners in Houston, they can check it out.
I love that. Very cool. And we'll definitely get this out in time for the New York crew to check it out. And hopefully, how long is the Houston show running?
End of March.
So plenty of time. So, okay, we will get it out. And I have to say happy early birthday to you. Thank you for doing this. This has been a wonderful, time for me to just also learn more about you. I can appreciate the art in my home a little bit more knowing your full journey. So thank you so much. And hope everyone enjoyed this episode. And feel free to reach out to Pothik. We'll put his contact information and website and everything in the show notes. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to South Asian Success. If this episode resonated with you, we hope that you'll share it with a friend or someone else who could resonate with it as well. And if you love what we're doing and building, please do rate us on whatever podcast method you stream on. Any reviews will help us grow and improve this platform. And if you are interested in joining us or talking more about your journey, please be sure to reach out. Take care.